Okay, so everyone, welcome to the last panel discussion, the ones organized by the Social-Ecological Systems Institute in this month. This panel discussion is entitled The Workings of Politics and Power for Social-Ecological Systems Research, which actually follows the discussion of the last two on how to get unstuck from the poly crisis and research in the Global South, whether it is beneficial or post-colonial. So we know that, well, there is this increasing in the trends of research, study the role of power on biodiversity conservation, on how the ecosystem services are distributed amongst social actors, or on social ecological dynamics. But what is less acknowledged, and maybe because this is a very uncomfortable truth, is that also power shapes the way by which we do research in social ecological systems. Research is shaped by our worldviews, mental models, and frameworks in which we believe, but also the power of relations among us, researchers, shape the research we do. So today we will talk about this power and politics that shapes the ways by which we do research, including the visible power, like structural hierarchies, but also the hidden and invisible power, the type of power that shapes our beliefs on what is good science, and define the logics of the scientific structures and hierarchies. And for that, we have 4 panelists today. Online, we have Jamila Haider, who yesterday got stuck in Stockholm train station, and she couldn't join. So that's why today we have her online. Jamila, she's researcher and team leader at the Stockholm Resilience Center. Her research focuses on farming resilience and landscapes with high biological and cultural diversity. And she also works with integrating social theory into social ecological systems. And she's strongly committed to enacting an ethos of care in academia. And with that, I would ask Jamila to do her opening statement.
Okay, thank you, Beta, and hello to everyone. Thank you for hosting me also online, despite the total system breakdown in Sweden with the trains yesterday due to a tech malfunction. Just to open then, along with biocultural diversity in mountain areas as an empirical focus and working for over a decade with social-ecological systems theory, another strand of my interest is how we do meaningful and careful research. So to bring the focus on power and politics, I just want to situate myself right now in my current work that I'm doing, which is writing a narrative nonfiction book as a collaborative ethnography with an alpine dairy farmer, as a result of a research encounter that sparked a deep curiosity within me, pushing me to rethink what it means to do research that matters and how power and politics shape all research. I'll give a brief intro into what the book is, because I'll keep referring to it, I think, throughout. It's a book about the resilience of an alpine family dairy farm. It's a story of the struggles and resilience of this place. It's a documentation of dying practices of making cheese and butter at high altitude summer pastures. It's a story of how to make decisions about what is enough to have a good life, and of the tension between addressing global sustainability challenges and being present and active in one particular place. It's a story of navigating mountain ridges and of unlikely friendship. It's a story of how a researcher and a farmer listened and learned from each other and came to see the world differently. So to conclude, we describe how in a context of politically polarizing views between rural and urban populations, we created a place of deep resonance for new ideas to generate and take root, and the consequences of that for knowledge co-creation. So that's a bit what I'm doing right now, and I pass it back to you, Beta.
Thank you, Jamila. We are looking forward to learning more about your book. And the next speaker is Katarina Lowe, am I right? She's a researcher based at the Leibniz Center for Agricultural Landscape Research in Berlin, and she works on sustainability, land use, and governance in the Global South. Her work focuses on social ecological transformation in sub-Saharan Africa, and she has a background in peace and conflict studies, and she is herself a trained mediator. And that's why at her heart is always to better understand how governance can be designed to positively impact community cohesion and peace. And with that, I will let her to do her opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you, Berta, for having me here. And what I just want to say as an opening statement is something that you've kind of also referred to already, is that I find very interesting that in research, we are dealing a lot with global challenges relating to the climate change, biodiversity, global inequalities, poverty. And here, this concept of polycrisis is very much accepted, right? So understanding that things are very complex with multiple parallel or overlapping and also connected crises as global scale. But I believe that when we're doing research, we should also consider actually the research and the system itself to being in polycrisis. Because I see that here politics and power is strongly embedded in the research being related to marginalization of selected knowledge systems or disciplines, for example, but also, of course, the funding structures or our publication system, and also then around gender disparities, dissemination, also other aspects of funding. And I think that this complexity and also the inequality is even more increased if we think of international, trans and interdisciplinary research settings. And until we overcome these existing structural inequalities of the research system, which I think will take a long time still, I think that would be very interesting to discuss more jointly also creative approaches and methods to overcome the power and politics in our confined spaces. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Katarina. Next one is Milena Gross, soon to be doctor, not professor Milena. She's working on understanding or eliciting the values of nature and nature contributions to people and how they impact quality of life and why nature matters to people. Her research focuses on different stakeholders, but particularly in the nexus of conservation and nature-based tourism. One of her hidden agenda, which is not anymore hidden because she's making it explicit here, is to reveal and discuss how our own positionality, the researcher's positionality, including her own, and our methodological choices shape the nature of the scientific insights and outputs.
Thank you so much, Berta, for introducing me and having me here. I would like to draw the attention to the research process and the academic structures that we're embedded in and how this shapes how we do research. So as Berta mentioned, one of my key research questions focuses on why nature matters to people. So basically the value or values that people ascribe to nature. And being familiar with the vast body of literature on values, I realized that there are diverse values out there, also as proposed by the IPAS valuation assessment. And it's not just that there are those diverse values out there, but there are also multiple frameworks and methods to study exactly these values. And how do we make decisions on which valuation framework and which valuation methods to choose? This is ultimately shaped by us researchers. It's shaped by our positionality, how we identify as researchers. It's shaped by our academic upbringing, by our education, by the academic setting we're embedded in. Not talking about mental models, normative assumptions, epistemologies, like all these factors come into play on how we make decisions in our research process. And this implies that methods and valuation frameworks that we choose are actually not neutral, but they articulate value. And this is important because when we conduct research on values, for instance, it's not just about the values that we want to study, but it's also important to consider which valuation frameworks and methods we choose, because those methods do not just elicit values, but they actually also create values. And therefore, I would like to draw our attention to our own positionality and stimulate reflection on how our positionality shapes our research, which will ultimately suggest recommendations to policy and practice.
Thank you, Milena. And the last one, Susana Hamakova. She leads the Department of Social-Ecological Analysis at the Global Change Research Institute of the Czech Academy of Science. She works with stakeholders, experts, and policymakers across different geographical and cultural contexts, including Europe, Central Asia, Africa, to co-develop scenarios for future development, pathways for sustainable and just futures for both people and nature. Susanna has been involved in the Intergovernmental Platform Biodiversity Ecosystem Services, IPBES, that Milena referred before, for the past 10 years, which is such an achievement, I would say. I quit before. And acts as coordinating lead author in the current IPBES Nexus assessment. Welcome, Susanna.
Thanks, Berta, and thanks everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion that we can have, hopefully, across the whole room. And yeah, I think, you know, like a lot of important things have been said already, and I just think that I resonate a lot with you know, saying that power in research relates to what framings and what concepts and what paradigms we decide to use. And I think I would just add that I think it's also like which of these paradigms or framings we're choosing is almost, in my point of view, also a matter of like the mental model that we are nested in. And coming from Eastern Europe and what we tend to call Global East in that scholarship, I think sometimes because you are kind of like in a blind spot of the like global imagination map, I think some of these things you tend to realize, I will say, like firsthand, because sometimes you find yourself outside of some of these like usual patterns or usual mental models that, you know, the world is pursuing. So I think whenever, for instance, like, you know, funding calls and, you know, like framings of research push us to use the global north, global south dichotomy, coming from global east, you suddenly feel that, you know, these are the moments when you're thinking there is something happening with the politics and power in research, and I am able to see it from this particular angle. So yeah, I think I would add the imagination that we have and how that is dominated by certain structures within research.
Many thanks. And I think your last example of the global north, global south, and this imagination or this dichotomy that is imposed links very nicely with my first question. Maybe it's not the same experience you want to share. So the problem with power and politics is too abstract that it's very difficult to touch it, right? So with the first question, I want to make it more tangible and visible. So my first question to you is, do you have a personal experience where you realized that power politics were impacting your research, and how did it make you feel? And we start with you, Susanna.
All right. Yeah. So, you know, I think, to be fair, I think probably many of us have experience from, let's say, experience with power from both sides, the moments when we feel we are on the powerful side and the moments when we feel like we are on the powerless side. And for you know, this exercise, I guess I will pick the powerless side because I feel those are always the ones, you know, the situations when we feel like more intensely about something. But I think when I have the feeling I'm facing power and politics in research the most is when I'm asked to react to a funding call. And through reacting to that funding call, I am asked to relate to how that call is written, what it emphasizes, what are the things that it finds important, you know, what are the framings, what are the frameworks that are fashionable at that point, and, you know, that I'm asked to use. And sometimes you resonate with that. And sometimes you feel you don't necessarily resonate with that. And sometimes you feel that maybe those calls are written from someone's perspective, you know, from a perspective of a certain part of the world or like certain group of stakeholders and so on. So in those moments when that clashes with your context and with your seeing the world, I would say that then you're kind of like very painfully aware of this, because you know that you are asked to either go with a powerful framing or reject it and then take the consequences.
Thank you. Milena.
Yeah. I would like to share an aha moment that I had about a year ago, and to directly respond to the question of how I felt embarrassed, extremely embarrassed, but I'm glad I went through this. So I was 2 years into my PhD, and I'm part of the Kilises project, Kilimanjaro Social-Ecological System. And according to the proposal, I had to interview and survey people working in conservation and tourism and people who would travel to Kilimanjaro to climb it, so tourists. And then we thought about like how we would bring these three stakeholder groups together and how we would frame the manuscripts and my PhD. And in a very short and summarized in a very abstract and simple way, there is this idea of biodiversity loss and decreasing trends in NCP supply and the need for conservation measures in order to counteract biodiversity loss. And one of these conservation measures are protected areas. I mean, there's a national park on Kilimanjaro, so this was like a key measure in order to counteract biodiversity loss. And at the same time, nature-based tourism was used or is used and argued as an excellent mean to finance such conservation, because how do we actually get the money to fund conservation? So this was like a pretty straightforward narrative, and I did research online to find out more about this nexus, but I couldn't really find like interesting perspectives on it. I only found those that would really perpetuate it. And then like 6 to 9 months later, I happened to attend an online panel discussion hosted by the Tanzanian Network Association. And they had a panel discussion on tourism. And fortunately, there was one researcher, Mr. Ogada from Kenya, a carnivore ecologist and conservation writer, who really brought up a lot of criticism on conservation areas and how they exclude people or can potentially exclude people, and the power-laden decisions that are that exist in this nexus. And from that moment on, I found words to really describe this nexus in a more critical way. And it was only when I entered the search on political ecology to find critical perspectives on that. So coming back to the topic of power, knowledge is power. And I really dared trying to find knowledge, but it was only specific keywords that really helped me to reveal more diverse perspectives. And it also prevented me from framing the research papers in a way that would promote traditional conservation approaches, which other people might identify my research also with. And what I took from this really embarrassing moment, because it took me 2 years into the PhD to find more critical perspectives on that, was to always stay open. Like if you have a specific understanding of a topic, stay open to potentially like different opposing views that would challenge your unknown mental models. So in that case, it was really about looking at the history of protected areas and conservation at Mount Kilimanjaro, to understand that if we study people's perceptions of and preferences for nature's contributions to people and values of nature, that we need to consider their social context. We need to consider the culture. It's not just a snapshot of time. It's not an isolated finding that we have, but it's embedded within the context. And I think this is what I really took, and it came with lots of emotions.
Thank you for sharing the embarrassing moment. Katarina, other embarrassing moment for you?
As you know, those are the ones you tend to forget.
Here is about uncomfortable truth.
Yeah, maybe just thinking more of how, right, the politics and how they're also affecting, or when I was thinking about how this actually also affects myself and my personal experience a lot, I started again thinking that I actually feel quite hindered from time to time within my own works, working more on the social ecological research with a special focus on the community dynamics, but also like peace building processes. And depending on the context in which we work in, I feel sometimes quite hindered, if not even muted to a certain extent in my ability to work with research in this context. And this starts, I think, what Milena already mentioned with this positionality of myself, but then of course also with the decision in our projects on who do we recruit. Because do I recruit someone who is from the country and that's very familiar maybe with the conflicting scenario situation, or do I better recruit someone from outside so there is not a certain association maybe already with a person we recruit, right? So does the team bring biases into the research? does that impact also on the quality of data, on the access of our stakeholders? And this is experience we definitely had. For example, in the case of Ethiopia, there was linkage to some team members with certain groups that were involved in conflicts. And so we had really trouble getting the sample we wanted or having the quality data that we were hoping for. So this is very much practical on how it is impacting, right, on the research. And the same also when we think of the safety and security of countries where we might be doing social-ecological research, we need to be very flexible. So postponement of trips, for example, is not unusual, or maybe also having to adjust our samples. So this question of representativeness, if we can't go to certain areas within a certain country, which we would have gone to though, etc., this also very much impacts, I think, on the actual research and what we can do. And then, of course, also then again, the politics within the country. So what is also the degree of democracy, maybe? What is the freedom of speech? What is also the freedom of research? To what extent can we work directly on peace or questions relating to peace building? Or do I maybe need to work more with more neutral concept, let's say, of a social cohesion, right? Where we work on trust, on collaboration, etc., but not directly on peace building, because people might be muted from the institutional side to talk about it. And this is also something I experienced in current research, where do this more polycentric study on social ecological restoration and the question how it is defined and how it can contribute to peace, with some respondents that I spoke to who were from contexts where you shouldn't talk too openly about previous conflicts or past experience. To certain questions, they were kind of mute. They did not respond. So when I tried to then ask them if they had worked within the same field, maybe in a different country, then suddenly their responses would come. Oh yeah, in this country it was this and this, and I would recommend that and that. So you could really feel how this makes a difference. And this makes me reflect a lot on the current works that we do on Rwanda, for example. Yeah. So.
Thank you. Jamila, what about you?
Yeah, thanks. So nice to hear all of your reflections. So first I'll get to the feeling part. Excuse me. But to start with, I think power and politics always shapes my research in social ecological systems. And the very concept of social ecological is actually a result of certain power dynamics, namely, it's the Cartesian mode of thinking that dominates scientific thought processes. This is the mode of thinking that separates mind and matter, nature and culture, object and subject, and I think is actually one of the foundations of also the problems of climate change and biocultural diversity loss. So if we stick with this powerful and dominant way of thinking and doing science, we're unlikely to move away from the unsustainable thinking and practices that have got us here, and to get to the transformative solutions needed to address these crises. And this realization, I think, in terms of the theory, came from critical feminist scholarship, and particularly the work of Karen Barad, in not just rethinking power, but also its dynamics. And it made me rethink the scientific foundations that I've been trained in, both in Cartesian philosophy, but also Newtonian physics, in which deterministic dynamics and continuity reign. And just to bring a quote that I was rereading yesterday in response, in preparation for the panel, Barad writes, "We know this story well. It's written into our bones. In many ways, we inhabit it, and it inhabits us." So it's a relational, we keep it alive through continuing to do this research, continuing to choose to do this research. The consequence of this is full knowability of nature and knowledge without responsibility. So in other ways, the belief in objective science. And it's this view that leads to research in which the researcher seeks to know about a subject, either obliviously, perhaps in more positivist objective science, or even using their own positionality to explain away biases. So maybe we can return to that question of when and when not to use our positionality, and when it can become othering. Drawing on work also by Foucault or Judith Butler, power isn't as, they don't conceptualize power as an external force out there, but something that's a continuous stabilizing and sedimentarizing force of which we are a part. And I think this is really, we can work with this really well with our kind of complexity foundation within sustainability science. And I think, though, to note my own positionality, of course, for more than a decade, I've been situated at the Stockholm Resilience Centre and also contribute to resilience theory building. And I find resilience and the broader SES perspective of the world both compelling and powerful conceptualizations to communicate social ecological embeddedness. And there's also a lot of work going on in terms of bringing in process relational and, of course, indigenous and other worldviews into this understanding. And like the political ecology that Milena also brought up, I think it's also important to engage in the critical literature, which, for example, state that social ecological resilience can be power blind or has neoliberal tendencies when it's applied. But I reject that resilience is inherently like this. And I've come to really draw on, I think, a great paper by Stephanie Simon and Samuel Randalls, who frame the ontological politics of resilience multiples. So in other words, this means to specifically articulate resilience at its point of application or intervention. And then this is where I want to bring up the personal, how this realization affected me, and how I came to that realization. Because it was with this worldview, and I think wanting to do reflexive social ecological research, that I set out with what was my own first research project to study the resilience of small-scale farmers in the Alps. And as part of the ethical consent process, so I interviewed 12 farmers, but I'll just focus on, or farms still doing these practices that are being lost at high summer pastures. But I got stuck with one farmer. And as part of the ethical consent process, I told the participants, in this case, Freya Sepp, my collaborative ethnography partner, that my research method was embodiment. And he adopted this as a mantra. He said, like, whenever I was unsure or clumsy, he said, get out of your head and into your body. And so I felt a change in this research, but I wasn't sure what it was. It felt like movement. It felt like I was being transported outside of myself when I took this embodied approach seriously. And I remember a distinct moment where I felt I had the choice to stop or to give myself to this process. And I really worried. I said, will I lose myself? Will I lose my objectivity, my rationality? And I was prepared for that. But it also felt like I was letting go of my capacity to define my subjectivity and my positionality. So I remember, I'll say, I wrote this in a diary. It's a very short excerpt. Yes, I say aloud to myself, to the openness and emptiness around me. Yes, I choose to let go of the research conventions around me that are constraining the questions I should be asking, the topics I should be focusing on. Yes, I choose to go beyond the boundaries these conventions have set. Yes, I choose to feeling my way in and through this process, not just thinking it. Yes, I say, to the uncertainty that now surrounds me. So to conclude, I turned to really new research methodologies. I teach qualitative methods to PhD and master's students here at the Resilience Centre, and I feel increasingly frustrated that the course material, which is in part inherited, is based around like three white guys, Marx, Weber, and Durkheim, who actually observed the Industrial Revolution. So isn't it time we shift how we do research so as not to reproduce the power dynamics that have created the unsustainability that characterize our world today? And I think maybe just to leave this with a kind of, a final thought, and this is on the overtly political, because the question was also about power and politics, and I've spoken mostly about power, but on the politics, I think really interesting right now, for example, on the nature restoration law debate within Europe, I get petitions from scientists to sign, and I get petitions from farmers to oppose it. I feel like there's no question, like within the biodiversity conservation community, that of course we need to be politically active as scientists supporting nature restoration, which, by the way, I also support. But I think the language that puts science above all else, the evidence says this, is so polarizing and so belittling to people who are actually stewarding these landscapes. I feel we really need to not just change the way we communicate this, but also fundamentally change the way we do research, which means looking while seeing and not just hearing, but really listening. So, and I think then we can break down some of those. But I have lots of questions there. If we do all that, what is robust science? Because I think the baseline actually shifts and there's different ethical implications, which, yeah, happy to talk about those things. Thank you.
Yeah, I will pick up on that, I would say, because when I was hearing you, I also have this body reaction, like the space, the system in which we were trained seems, well, we know that it has the powers, it has the politics, but seems to perpetuate. So we are not getting out. We are not getting unstuck. We are perpetuating these power dynamics that the economy. So my question to all of you would be how we can overcome these dynamics of perpetuating. And I also like when you say, Yamila, when not to bring positionality. So when and when not, yeah, when we should try to overcome and when maybe it's just better to step back and regain our energy, or as you said, Yamila, stop. I choose to stop. So this is the question I put on the table. Oh, you raise your hand, Susan.
Not necessarily. No, I do have a take, but I feel like mine is from a different angle. So I would maybe like stick with, this angle that we have here. If anyone has like a closer,
Like how to overcome the perpetuating powers. We talk about positionality. Yeah.
I think it also takes a lot of courage to question our own mental models and to question our own system. And I think it also comes with asking other people to reflect on us. So in research, like I'm doing research in the Global South, so I'm going somewhere else to do research as a sort of outsider. It might also be worthwhile asking other people to like study us, help us reflect on our own systems. So to get like some sort of a different perspective that may stimulate our own reflection and thinking processes in order to gain the courage, talk to other people, get peers on board to change the narratives that we're embedded in.
Jamila?
Yeah, so I'll just give a brief reflection, I guess, of my experience with this, but then, which is quite personal, but then also linked to, I think, a new reading. I was recently at the Pollen, the Political Ecology Conference in Lund, and this question, in Lund, Dodoma, and Lima. And just to respond to this question as well about like when to position or not and how. And I think for me, that I entered the research with this reflexive gaze, but I felt like I kept being stuck in reflecting existing knowledge. And it was letting go of my positionality and entering the world as it is in this flow of movement. So as, new materialist scholars would call a diffractive methodology, where I felt like a genuine novelty opened up. And I think that's the space in terms of unsettling these power dynamics. I feel for the first time in my entire life that I'm in a space of, genuine like creation and novelty. And I guess I have a question then in terms of, I'm trying to, I'm currently writing this up as scientific articles, but it feels very much more humanities, let's say. So maybe that's also a question of how open sustainability science, in which I would usually tend to position social ecological research, is to these other ways of knowing, also with the body, for example. And then just as a second, there was a 2024 paper just published in April, perhaps you're all aware of it, but I'll just say by Ghani and Khan, it's called Positionality Statements as a Function of Coloniality, Interrogating Reflexive Methodologies. And they kind of, they bring up, I think for different reasons, like the acknowledgement of privilege potentially as a paradoxical act, or like it can, it it depends, or just doing, and that's not at all what I think anyone on this panel is saying, but kind of just explaining away this privilege in a positionality without integrating it into the methodology or the way we do research is risk of perpetrating colonial practices. So I just wanted to point to that paper that someone pointed me to recently. Thanks.
Now it's your turn. I can see your face, Susanna.
Yeah, no, sorry. No, because I feel a bit guilty because I'm definitely dragging it back to some kind of Cartesian thinking. But like when we are talking about power and research, I still think that it's almost like worth to structure like which layer of power we are talking, and I think in how that resonates to me with what was just said is that like I think it's really important to give all this reflection to what power we exert over other people doing research. Having said that, I think it's also important to see that like there are power relations within different scientific fields, and there are different power relations across scientific fields. And importantly, there are power relations in the outside world that we do research in.
Yeah.
And I just really want to flag that, like I once again, like I really relate to these, interventions, and I think it's really important. But once again, coming from a context where research as such is a totally marginalized like actor in society, and like decisions are made across the axis of money, lobbying, like the research is not entering the decision space, I still think it's also important to reflect on the fact that like, even if we nail all these things, so we might be living in worlds where research knowledge is not the knowledge that's shaping what's happening, So once again, like I think different experiences kind of like make different layers of this painful to us, I think. And once again, I think like when we are in a realm where we can change things, I think it's really important to try to change them. But I think it's also important to keep an eye on the fact that, we are fighting our fight here within this like sector of science. And there are contexts and there are situations in which like science as such is a totally like, unheard, marginalized sector. So just to say that it's also good to have that in mind when we are fighting these battles.
Yeah, and that's, I think in that direction was my question, like when to stop, when there is a fight that we cannot take. But within our system, for example, now listening, Jamila was like, I want to see whether sustainability science is open to welcome the body. Yeah. So, and sometimes I have this feeling that we say, I want to see how social ecological systems research, how sustainability science, but we are the scientists creating the knowledge. We are the scientists creating the system. So having in mind that we are the scientists creating the system and not taking into account the power external, yeah. How then, what are the strategies we can bring to try to overcome these power relations, or are the power relations necessary? To what extent? And if not, how we can overcome them? Which are necessary, which are not? Do you have an idea there? They are not easy questions. Yeah.
Happy to do it, but if yes.
Go ahead, Susanna.
So to me, I think this is crucial, and I think the trouble is that like some of these solutions are comfortable and some are uncomfortable, and I think in a way, for instance, and I'm realizing I'm probably going to be controversial, but in a way, I think
that's what they want.
For instance, I think in sustainability science, at least like how I see it, there has been a lot of conversation around reflexivity, and how to reflect. And my point of view, that at this point, and I'm realizing that it was hard to push it into the focus, but now that it's in the focus, I think that's actually becoming the comfortable way how to fight the power relations, because nowadays it's already like you're having that conversation because you're allowed to have the conversation, it's possible. There are uncomfortable conversations that I think really, really dig into, like the reasons why we do things as researchers, and at a lot of points that really, like boils down to how we earn money, or like, how we make our living, how we live our lives. And a lot of these solutions that I think are on the table actually clash with the ability to do that, So I think those are the uncomfortable moments when actually changing power structures and actually doing something suddenly touches you and your livelihood and your way of living. So I feel like the more influential ways are there, but they are dangerous because then that clashes with your job, with your, way of living, with your earning money and so on. Roberta, I don't know if that was the correct answer.
No, I try to put it like with an example,
So, I think
particularly for
yeah.
for those who are not in the system. Also for me, I was trying like, I see how it might affect my livelihood, but I want you to bring it to as an example.
I get you. So, I think, there are moments, I think, in research when you have the feeling that, we are all part of like big consortia. We are all parts of big projects where there are multiple partners. We are part of science policy interfaces where there are many actors. And I think there are moments when it's clear that, people want their framings and their concepts to be the ones that are going to be used, which is natural because, people want to be, those ones who introduce powerful framings and powerful frameworks. And those are the moments when I feel like, it is really sensitive to come up there and say, listen, like, I think we are just using this because it was pushed by powerful actors, which is a sensitive thing to do because then you are suddenly clashing with, the dynamics of the group, dynamics of the consortia, dynamics of the platforms. And it's not an easy thing to do. And I feel that for good reasons, people quite often opt for not doing that. So I think that those are the moments when, like, there is something that you could do with power structures, you can show them out. But for very natural reasons, it's hard and you will think about it hard.
I get you. Milen, I saw you writing.
Yeah, I was thinking about like potential door openers to change from within. And I think it's actually still the powerful actors within the systems that can function as door openers, such as supervisors.
She promised to do something like that.
No.
Pointing the finger towards me.
No.
Thank you.
But I think
publicly.
but what I wanted to say is more about like who you choose as your academic peers and as your supervisors and those who like hold powers can really help you to change the system from within. So what I'm saying is that there are still powerful actors. Like I can't remove you as a powerful actor, but with your support, we can change the system from within because you have reached a specific position in the system that helps us to to change the system from within, to change the way we do research, to try different methods, to really question and to not just stay within the traditional narratives. So I took you as an example because you're my supervisor, and this is what I perceive here at Lifehana is really about who you're talking with and who you're working with can really help you change from within and not get stuck in the system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to have allies.
Yes.
Powerful, and to use the power for good. Which leads me to my next question. I'm looking at you, Katarina, because you're very quiet. Exerting my power over you right now. It goes to the question that I think many of the students doing transdisciplinarity projects might think. Let's see if I'm right here. So when we do research, often it's to gain deep understanding, but often is, particularly in transdisciplinary research, is to contributing to more sustainable and just futures. But then I find myself often thinking, who decides what is sustainable? Who decides what is just? We enter the space of normativity, and then who decides what is right, what is bad science? Can we do good science, but not being like an ally in changing the structures of the scientific system? And how we can assess that? Yeah, because the system where we are assessed is based on publications and proposals that says nothing about the power relations we have and how we exert our power. So, yeah, my question basically is how can we assess what is good and bad science, particularly in transdisciplinary approaches, when we also have a relationship with non-academic stakeholders?
To me, that brings in already also the question of
when do we assess this, right? And I think this is a big problem that we are currently facing also, is that we don't have a lot of longer term monitoring or evaluation or whatsoever. So we might be able to assess something as very efficient or reaching whatever goals. What does that mean with regards to any sustainability or long-term prospect? So I think here, for example, or for the change of politics and power and the research system, we would really need to also strengthen or change the system that allows us for more long-term monitoring. Also to, who defines success? To me, who thinks that we very much need to look at all the 3 dimensions of sustainability, and thus very much also at the societal structures. I think success is very much defined by the individual context that we work in, and by the people and the communities, but up to, of course, also the national levels where we work at. So we cannot predefine any success factors in this term, but if people do not have ownership, if it's not clear on why they should engage in restoration activities or in whatever other activities, a project might work very well, but the second someone is gone and we have not really discussed any exit strategy, which is another shortcoming that is happening in most of the projects, that exit strategies are not integral part from the beginning of transdisciplinary collaboration onwards, then the project or any initiative fails very quickly. And we see this very much in restoration, with many targets defined, plenty of initiatives and activities from governmental, but also international organizations implemented, many targets met with regards to the number of seeds or planted sites and hectares met, etc. But the people were forgotten. And so multiple countries are now realizing we actually forgot about this livelihood component, and livelihood component also defined, from my perspective, in a broader definition, where we not only look at socioeconomic development of people, but also at the societal questions and processes.
To include more people, more ideas. Did I look at you, Jamila?
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Beata. I'm going to pick up on that question and also loop back a bit to this, like, different marginalizations within and outside of science. And I think this question, for example, of who decides what is sustainability or who decides what is justice. I think as a researcher, our role of defining justice is to ask, how can I help constitute who and what come to matter? So both human and non-human in that sense, I think. So that's in the questions that we ask, as opposed to explicitly saying what justice is. And I think I guess to give an example in terms of like something that I'm really struggling with in terms of the power within science is, of course, we are assessed based on a system of production, whether it's money that we, and like whether it's money from a grant or papers that we produce. And that's based on certain understandings in a peer review system, again, on what scientific rigor is. And so I do think that while bringing back to Susanna's point, and I think we can have a really interesting conversation there, which might also continue. Yes, science is often a marginalized actor, but there's certain science which does then end up having, or something I'm struggling with is, it's still, I'm going to give an example. So for example, like we know that Newtonian physics is not the latest understanding of how the world works, right? Like the small t and that time is linear and progress is linear, because we have a quantum understanding of how time actually works. But rather than actually incorporate that into the way that we do science and the way that we also do scenarios within social ecological system sustainability, we continue to use a Newtonian logic. Why? Because it serves the status quo of linearity and progress as linear. And I think it's really important for us as researchers to question the power dynamics that are maintaining this actually wrong view of the world. So I think, and I like this example because I think it brings it back to, like, I don't think, at least I'm not going to dispute quantum mechanics. I can take that as like, it's not a subjective, interpretive view of the world. But why is it that we choose certain science as, that we incorporate into our work? So this isn't so eloquent, but I guess I think it is important to make these decisions about when we question science from within, and when we, as you're saying also, Susanna, which I agree with, when do we unite with science as a marginalized actor in certain contexts? So I don't know if that's, maybe I jumped around too much through the panel there, but maybe some thought.
No, I think it's totally right, because it comes back to the starting point, like what are the frameworks we choose and why. So I think it goes back to the why. Do you want to add something on that?
Maybe quickly, I feel, I feel like there are two lines of conversation. I would like be keen to engage in both, but Jamila, we'll finish it over a drink at some point. But just to say that, like what you said about, the how to assess what is right and what is wrong when we are doing research, and I think maybe like learning from Jamila, I'll also use a personal story, because I'm a part of a team now, and we are people who span very different theories of change, how the world works. We have people who previously were engaged in very high-level advocacy, who are working with, high-level politicians, and we have people who have been starting movements, and who have been really in like very, kind of like bottom-up processes of societal change. And I think that the imperative to some of our team members feel really strong imperative to like change the world with what they are doing as researchers. And I think that because we come from such diverse corners, we have had a lot of really interesting conversations about how then define this new role of science. If the role of science is shifting, like what does it mean? And I think one of the conversations we had, I find it very relevant. It's full of questions and no answers, but I think we were discussing that, as researchers, we do have ways how to assess how knowledge development works, although like these ways are flawed, right? We all know that, but we do have some kind of like assessment grid that tells us whether our knowledge generation processes were good or bad. But what I feel quite painfully is that, like, if we are asked, or if we feel we should, engage in another role as researchers, then I feel we are like painfully lacking a way how to assess what is a good or bad intervention in the world by science, because we do have frameworks that help us reflect on what we are doing, but we don't have frameworks to help us assess whether what we have done was right or wrong, or like bad or good, or successful or not. So I think if science takes this, new role, and I hear that, there is definitely a call for it, then I really think it would be much easier to find some orientation in that space if we were able to relate to something like that.
Then I will open to the questions. We are 1 hour, so I don't know whether online there is questions or in the room. Yes, please.
So you were talking about positioning oneself. How important is the position oneself, and do you think is it possible, or is it challenging in the transdisciplinary research to position oneself? Anyone?
Anyone. Milena talked about positionality before.
I think it's really important to position or to situate ourselves in how we conduct science, because, as I said earlier, it clearly shapes how we do research. And it might also reveal our mental models, it will reveal our normative assumptions, and reveal much more about who we are as a person, as researchers, who conducts the research. So I think it definitely doesn't harm to position ourselves, and it actually is a really transparent way of showing the decisions we made in order to conduct the research we are doing. So I would argue for it and see it as a benefit, and also as a starting point for other people that read your research to really understand where you're coming from. Because for me, those scientific papers, they can be really like abstract, and they study systems and they propose recommendations or solutions according to a system. But I think the positionality and the reflection really helps to contextualize how these results came about. And I think if you asked different people, or you give the same research question to different people, they might yield different results. So understanding their own positionality really helps to see the road they went down and to sort of like organize the results, to contextualize the results.
Yeah, no, I absolutely resonate with that. And I think one thought related to this is that, you know, in my eyes, it's crucial to do that. But I think it's also important to reflect, like, what are the axes of positionality that we have picked to use when we are describing our positionality, you know, because in those moments we follow some kinds of patterns. We position ourselves along different axes, and I think reflecting on where we took those axes from is interesting.
The positionality.
Positionality. Absolutely.
Greta, and then
Yeah, I was wondering then how will such positioning look like? You say that what is it more like on a rational, yeah, I studied this and I live here, and then reflecting on the person's situation you are like grew up with, or is it more about like the beliefs you have? Because I feel like depending on that, it's all influencing ourselves a bit. Do you, like, before you enter a research team, when you form a research team, do you also like, please give me a proposal of what your understanding of the world is, to see that my research team is also built up in a possibly diverse way of perspectives? Like, I can't really like see how this is working very well, or like I feel it's really important, but I don't see how this could be done.
I can confirm. So I haven't seen a default positionality statement. So it's a very personal document, and what you basically put in there is based on your own understanding, on your own position. I mean, there are lots of papers out there that suggest guiding questions that you can answer, and they really range from what's your academic background, what is your worldview, like it covers a whole range of aspects. And I think when it comes to like who you work with, it really depends on whether you have the choice. But I think ultimately when you start writing papers, you can choose who your co-authors are. So I did not ask any of my co-authors to provide me a positionality statement, but I got to know people along the way, and I know why I want certain people to be part of, let's call it the research team or the authoring team, because I know that they bring a specific type of positionality that helped me push through ideas in the manuscript. So right now I'm not in the position to choose my research team, but I'm in the position to choose my authors team. And again, this is probably also shaped by my own positionality.
there is one online and one in the room. I give one online and then we go with you. Okay.
The online one is quite a simple one. Is it possible to have some of the references on the positionality statement?
Sure.
I think we can collect the reference, and when we circulate the YouTube, I asked Marike to add the references. This would be the easiest way to
So
go.
when it's published as a YouTube video, then we put the references to that.
Yeah, when we announce that the YouTube video is online, in the email, we will share the positionality reference. Is that okay for online people? Yes, apparently it is.
Okay, so first, thank you all for talking. I found it very inspiring. I have a question towards moving to a new type of research. So then that you talked a lot about that you're reflecting like the research process, and that we should move on to a more or less traditional way of researching. And my question is concerning us students now. So I mean, we learn how to do research and how to do it properly, how to reflect during the process. How can we contribute to this new type of research? And like from the here and now, how can we now in our heads like have something in mind to be more reflective and maybe to help contributing to this new paradigm shift?
I think it goes straight to you, Jamila.
Yeah, thanks. And I hope it was a bit hard to hear, but I think I understood in terms of like how the recommendations for students in terms of how to engage with research that is maybe more risky, definitely less fundable, maybe has less power. And I mean, I can reflect very personally that I struggle with this when I teach as well, because I am one of the qualitative methodology experts at the Resilience Center. So I teach qualitative methods, and what I have started to do, and I think this then reflects to maybe how you could go about it as a student, would be this is what textbooks say, right? In terms of, for example, write a feelings memo. So when you feel something, write it as a memo. And then what is kind of in more conventional qualitative research that is that something might be done with that, but not to integrate them into the data making. But there's increasingly research, and I'd be happy to share some of these links as well, but how feelings are part of data making, for example. There's also like a turn in terms of this concept of data making. But again, what I often advise my at least master's students is to like play it safe and engage with that literature. So for example, data making, I was like, don't use data making because your examiner might really not like that. But if that's something that speaks to you, like just keep it going as an interest. But that said, I do think there's like a massive turn, whether it's what we call the relational turn, engaging with more process relational philosophies, engaging in different ways with different cosmologies and worldviews. But also, I mean, sustainability science and SES research is a really young science, right? And I think you as students are part of shaping that as well. And I think I love seeing every few years, there's like a new generation of a PhD cohort that has totally different needs and feelings or like scientific frontiers than I did 10 years ago. So I think that's just what I would say is like, I think we are science, we are sciencing, even though it's not a word. It should be. Yeah, so I don't know. I feel like cautious exploration, maybe. Yeah, happy to talk more about that with anyone.
You have more question? There is Caroline, and then maybe, and then we might close. Okay, two more and we close.
Yeah, it's more of first of all, thank you. And I really like the idea of uncomfortable zone. And I was uncomfortable several times hearing you. I think, this we should do also. And we have so little time and funding is different. And so I like the idea of uncomfortable zones and moments and ideas that really challenge us. That these are our starting points for really innovative research and all these things. And so I was wondering if there's time, if you can share some ideas or tips or practices, or how we work with these uncomfortable zones and ideas so that we don't just think it's easier to do in the comfort way.
I can try. Thanks for that question, and I think I will maybe kind of like resonate with what Jamila just said, and also with some of these like corridor stories, that you sometimes hear in research. And one of these corridor stories that I at some point heard and that really helped me was that, like at all points of your research life, you kind of like should have your like pragmatic and idealistic track, and you should really make sure that you have both, because if you don't have the pragmatic track, chances are that you won't be a researcher in a few years. And if you don't have the idealistic track, you're basically like, like you're one of the people who are making research what it is, So for me, it's almost like, I think in the uncomfortable zones, you meet interesting people who are as keen to explore these like, really like uncomfortable facets of what we are doing together with you. And I think you can find a lot of connection and maybe also some like interesting ways forward. I would also say it's important not to build, like burn all bridges to the conventional world of research, because once again, that's the world that ultimately you want to do something with, or like you want to change maybe. So I think talking about it is a good way, because through talking, you can connect to a lot of people who are seeing things in the same way as you do, and you never know where that leads, right? So I would say talking about it.
Good therapy.
There's an
No.
That's so cute.
What I also think in this whole thing is that we need to give things also time to breathe and circulate, because I also felt a lot of frustrations and still do many times, but then not to think, okay, now I need to have a solution and this is like X, Y, Z, I can do this and that, is to say, okay, at least I'm, starting to get more and more aware of all these, problems and challenges that we are facing, and then to take it slowly but surely and have this reflexive and at the same time sometimes also pragmatic approach that only brings you forward from time to time to stay in research. And then for my side also sometimes we also have to take responsibility and also sometimes make use of our position and power. So for example, if you have collaboration partners and they suddenly have certain ideas they want to work on and they find a call, but they themselves cannot apply, then maybe I should take up the responsibility, even if it's more work, to maybe then take also a lead in their name and, also access certain channels of funding together with them. So I think there is some space for maneuver. We can also try to make use of maybe some powers that we have until we change the system for good.
I'm just thinking about what I do if I find myself in an uncomfortable situation. And usually there are lots of emotions connected with uncomfortability. So it might be related to vulnerability, shame, being embarrassed, being frustrated, being upset. And in such situations, I'm actually like leaving my rational self and moving on to more the own emotional self, to more feeling as a human being. And I think this is what we should not forget in this discussion, is that we are not just the rational mind, but we're also human beings with specific like emotions. We relate to what we're studying. And I think embracing more the wholeness of us beings can help us to navigate such situations. Yeah.
Jamila, do you want to add something? Or
Maybe just really briefly on the uncomfortable space. I think that's that probably means that, that there's something disruptive happening. And I think that there's discomfort for good and bad reasons, which maybe I won't go into, right? I'm not advocating for bad, uncomfortable spaces, but in terms of like the confusing, uncomfortable spaces, I think those are often generative for novelty. And I think there's like it's good to embrace that to a certain extent. But also, as I think has been discussed, there's also then a time to kind of step out of that space and say, okay, like now in terms of a research question or approach or process, this would be a good way forwards, which can of course, I think, continuously be reassessed. That would be a response to the uncomfortable space.
thank you. And now I'm going to make uncomfortable people online because we don't have more time for questions. So I'm sorry. I saw Joanne saying like, Berta, mic close. Yes. So I'm closing. And for that, I want one sentence from each of you as closing.
All right. I think it's really important to have conversations like this, and I'm glad we could have one, because I also think that it also shows this thing in all the facets that it has, or some of the facets that it has. So I'm grateful that we could have this chat, and once again, hoping to have the space in the future to develop some of these lines further.
Thank you.
Thank you for what you said, and I completely agree. And I hope that also this discussion that we started here, also like critically reflecting on ourselves, helps future research to be shaped, and also stimulating future discussions on how we actually want to conduct research.
What I feel is that identification with what I'm working on, and then this reflexivity on my own positioning and on the research that we work in, but also in relation to policy, politics, society, kind of having this perspective, will help us to engage in this continuous dialogue. And that's what I would love to continue here on other spaces.
Thank you, Katarina. You are closing the session, Jamila, in a big screen.
That feels very powerful. I wish I had a perfect sentence of wisdom. But I think just acknowledging also the questions by students, I think, you know, life is nonlinear, our research pathways are nonlinear, and there are times when it's good to do something that feels safe, and there's times when it's good to do things where you feel courageous. I happen to be in a moment where I feel stable enough with in my hierarchy of needs that I feel like I can really push the boundaries on some things. So that I think this ebbs and this flows. So maybe it's a reflection on my position or my situation at the moment. And yeah, really happy to I would love to continue this conversation with anyone who's interested. So thank you for hosting.
Thank you all, and thank you all for being here. And with that, I think we close the 3 panel discussions, and Social-Ecological Systems Institute can rest for a while.
Thank you, Berta, for the organization.
Thank you very much. And those who are here, now we can go to the